Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
We're going to jump straight into our first conversation, which is conversations on CARICOM with His Excellency David Comissiong. But we know that COP28 is occupying much of the headlines in the news. The World Climate Action Summit, Transforming Climate Finance, is one major thing happening. So we want to bring the ambassador in now as we look at all that was happening at that very important meeting. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Tisha.
Good morning. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Well, I may not see you for the Christmas season since you'll be off, so let me wish you a Merry Christmas well in advance.
I accept that. And to you and yours.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So
yes, COP28. How could we have a COP and not talk about CARICOM? The influence of CARICOM, the influence of Barbados, influence of the Bridgetown Initiative and Prime Minister Mayor Amor Mottley. Of course, the big news, the first piece of big news coming out of COP28 on the very first day was the news that the long wished for loss and damage fund, not only has it been set up, but that the pledges have come in. It is being capitalized. I think by now we should be up to approximately $100 billion, $1 billion, sorry, in capitalization. Of course, we want it to be much, much bigger than that. But the fact that that COP was able to announce that that victory on day one had a lot to do with Barbados and CARICOM, had a lot to do with work done by our climate envoy, Professor Avinash Prasad, in negotiations leading up to the start of COP28, and had a lot to do with the Bridgetown Initiative. And of course, the Loss and Damage Fund is money that will be used as grant money to help countries like the CARICOM countries that are hit by hurricanes, that perhaps are hit by sargassum seaweed, but to help them to rebuild after one of these disasters. So that is what it's really about, grant money to rebuild. So I want us to go to a very important panel that was held. It featured a number of world leaders, President Macron of France, Prime Minister Mottley, President Ruto of Kenya, Akufo-Addo of Ghana, the British Prime Minister. And I want us to start with a clip from President Macron, because he puts into context how this loss and damage fund has come about.
Thanks to the commitment of EAU today, we have the Loss and Damage Fund, which is part of this initiative, and I want to thank Mia, because it was an idea launched in Bridgetown Initiative, and we will commit up to 100 million on this issue and this fund to be clear. But I think we need much more, and we need a series of clarification. And I just want to complete this agenda and the four-piece approach by three elements being part of it. One, on loss and damage. We will have to prepare to simplify the governance, and this is why I say up to, given the governance, because we should distinguish intermediary revenue countries and poor countries. We will have to give a very open mandate for the governance, because it should not be over-monitored, and we discussed that with Ajay. And we should be very careful on two things on loss and damage. Number one, it should not be a substitute of insurance and reinsurance business. Because for a lot of countries, this is their job. And we have to rethink and, I would say, reframe the financials. But it should not be taxpayers' money of certain countries to pay instead of what the insurers will leave. Otherwise, we will create a big disorder in this world. And the second point is in terms of contribution. All those who contribute to the situation should should be part of it. And we should not forget prevention. And this is why, thanks to the SDRs, what the IMF is financing in a lot of countries are prevention actions.
Yes.
And it's very important because it's much more profitable than just financing loss and damage, because it's too late.
Opportunity to see just one aspect of what was happening, but we saw President Macron make direct reference to the Bridgetown Initiative, Ambassador.
Yes. So you see, the Bridgetown Initiative is what injected a lot of energy into this whole climate change agenda, because that loss and damage fund had been mooted, virtually decades ago, and they have struggled to put it together. The Bridgetown Initiative brought, as I said, new energy and a new movement, and I want to credit the work of Professor Avinash Prasad, because the last year's COP had made a determination that there was to be a loss and damage fund, and then they set up this transition committee to concretize the idea. And Professor Prasad was our Caribbean and Latin American representative on the committee and did a lot of the negotiating work to actually bring it to fruition. But you heard President Macron there. He's speaking about, number one, the size of the fund needs to be a lot larger. He's speaking about that we have to get the governance of the fund right. And then he's speaking about in the importance of insurance. And we are going to go to another clip where Prime Minister Mottley actually schools him on issues pertaining to the realities of issues pertaining to insurance. She takes up the issue of the size of the fund and some of the other sources of funding that will be required to bring it to the scale that it is required to be at, because this fund has to be at a scale of at least 100 billion US dollars. So a lot more needs to be done, and also in terms of governance of the fund, how it is going to be governed. And I should say that again, CARICOM is going to play a role in governance of the fund, in that the ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda has been assigned to chair a contact group to stay in contact with this initiative and make sure it is properly developed. This clip where Prime Minister Mottley is speaking as part of that high-level panel will demonstrate why PM Mottley of Barbados, and by extension CARICOM, is such a driving force within this whole climate change movement, because of our deep understanding of the issues and the fact that we have given a lot of thought, not just to the problem, but to solutions to the problem.
I cannot think of someone who has been most energetically involved in fighting for a better world than Mia Mottley. We all know about the Bridgetown Initiative, Mia. We know that you don't shy away from speaking truth to power. We also know that you are tremendously capable of bringing solution mindset rather than oh my goodness, it's so bad, crying mindset. So tell us how you see this COP. How do you see our moving to a better world?
Thank you very much, Kristalina, and let me thank our hosts here in UAE for their passion and for the excellent arrangements thus far. This is where the rubber hits the road, and regrettably, we've been talking for some time. We're beginning to see progress. The question is whether it will be equal to what is needed. We believe, for example, that the capitalization of the Loss and Damage Fund is critical because it provides essential grant funds post-disaster, and that is absolutely necessary. But the scale of its capitalization will be a concern to all if it is not properly capitalized. And that's why we feel that a mechanism that allows both for capitalizing the loss and damage, but increasing what is available to you with the Resilience Sustainability Trust and what is available to development banks for resilience funding is equally critical. We've been talking about public money, which has to continue. We've been talking, however, also about mechanisms for non-state actors contributing. And whether it is through the international taxation that Emmanuel is speaking about, where we can spread the burden, not just to the oil and gas companies, which we've said, if you've made $4 trillion in profits last year, $200 billion will not hurt you. Treat 95% of your profits as 100% and give the other 5% to be shared between a loss and damage fund and financing resilience and adaptation through the mechanisms. Similarly, we're asking people, and I'm conscious of the time, so please, we're asking people to look at how do we share the burden. Each of us wants to save the planet. Now, if we have 4 billion people traveling last year, who is going to stop traveling because of a $5 or $10 US charge per ticket? And that allows everybody to be able to share the burden, as William and Emmanuel are looking to do with the International Taxation Force. Similarly, you have $7 trillion in goods moving on ships last year. If you put 1% on that, that's another 70 billion. So when you take 200 from oil and gas and you take 70 billion from international shipping, not to be passed on to the consumer, by the way, and when you take equally another 40, 50 billion from international travelers, air travelers, and then you look at what is the most efficient financial transactions tax and dealing with insurance, so that we have a dedicated source of funding, not just for loss and damage, but for the global public goods that have to be financed in order to build resilience. Secondly, we need to be able to determine how best we're going to manage and regulate carbon markets. We're talking all over the place, and we haven't settled on how best this can work to avoid the greenwashing and to avoid implosion. Thirdly,
Aji is going to solve this.
I hope so.
Putting him
And he's already started with what the climate resilient debt clauses, debt pause clauses, what we call climate clauses. Barbados is the largest issuer globally now of debt with climate clauses. It works. Immediately upon a disaster, we will be allowed to save over 2 years 20% of GDP. That makes sense because I don't need to be paying debt when I should be providing shelter or providing food immediately after a disaster. And we learned the hard way when Dominica had to pay money immediately upon that. And the last point I want to make is where and how are we going to make decisions? Because that is what is holding us back. We get here, we talk. At the end of the day, how are we going to have a mechanism that can secure international taxation as efficiently as the world has imposed on us the global taxes and Pillar 2 with respect to the global minimum tax? How are we going to ensure that the voices of small countries who have a different reality, insurance works where insurable risk exists? And Emmanuel, I hope we can get that for other parts of the world. But my fear is in the Caribbean, it's already being seen as an uninsurable risk. We see the retreat of insurance companies in Florida. We see the absolute retreat of them in California with wildfires. So that is why we went for debt clauses, because it gives us access to money to deal with people who are uninsured and underinsured immediately after disaster. So I hope we can continue the conversation. Obviously 3 minutes or 4 minutes can't get into the details of it, but suffice it to say that we have enough ideas. The problem is, where is the decision making going to be made and who is going to be at the table to make the decisions? Because it isn't only about state actors, it's also about non-state actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amir.
Of course, just snippets of the presentations from COP28. Come back in here, Ambassador, as a follow-up to that bit of the presentation from the Honorable Mayor Mottley that we show.
Well, you heard the wisdom of the Caribbean on display there. You also heard that another very important part of the Bridgetown Initiative that is gaining traction, that is the debt pause clauses in lending instruments, so that you put these clauses in. Barbados has led the world with this. The UK has picked up on this. Many other countries and institutions have conceded that they're going to do it. But when you lend money, you put in this clause that if the country is hit by a disaster of a certain magnitude, that there is a suspension, a cessation of debt payments for a period of 2 years, so that that government doesn't have to be, looking to pay back on loans for that 2-year period. It can use all of its national revenue to help its citizens who would be suffering from the disaster. So that's another important. The Bridgetown Initiative is really a very fertile document. It actually speaks to all of the issues, addressing issues of poverty, addressing issues of adaptation to the climate change, reconstruction after you're hit, a whole range of issues. And the Prime Minister keeps touching on a very important one, which is about reforming the decision making in the international economic and political order. Because we always make this point that the system that we live in today was established at a time when most of our countries, the black and brown countries of the world, we were still colonies. And so these institutions were set up with us not present, and therefore we are not sufficiently involved in the decision-making processes. And the point that she's hammering on is that, yes, we come to these meetings, we come up with these good ideas, these good solutions, but what is defective is a decision-making process in which we are all involved to actually, make these ideas stick, to operationalize them. And I guess that is something that we are still struggling with. And but I dare say we are going to get it right. I mean, Barbados, CARICOM, we push the idea that the African Union should be included in the G20, and the G20 group of nations become the G21. But that happened this year. We are also pushing for reform of the United Nations Security Council, and so these are progressive ideas that we just have to keep the activism going. But if we look at this climate agenda, what we can say is that many of the elements of the Bridgetown Initiative are gradually being put into place, not yet at the scale that we would wish them to be at. So we have to try to upscale it all. But we can say so far, so good. The effort that we started about just over a year ago with this Bridgetown Initiative is, in fact, bearing fruit, and very good fruit at that.
Absolutely. So it's wonderful to see that in these high-level meetings at conferences like COP28, our Prime Minister was able to kind of bring more about the Bridgetown Initiative to the fore. But I'd like for us to kind of double back a little bit and look at how the regional leaders or other countries in the Caribbean are adapting the Bridgetown Initiative, or how they are, what their thoughts are in line with what's contained therein, and how we're working together to close the gaps towards 2030 and, of course, instituting the Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, let me say that CARICOM has adopted the Bridgetown Initiative. So the Bridgetown Initiative is not just Barbados policy, it is also CARICOM policy. And all CARICOM governments, all of the CARICOM representatives there at COP28 will be pushing the Bridgetown Initiative. And, and we also need to say that CARICOM has played a very big role in this whole climate change agenda. Because in addition to what we do under the CARICOM umbrella, there's also AOSIS, the Association of Small Island States, which is a broader gathering of small small island developing countries, very vulnerable to the climate crisis. And it is AOSIS, in fact, that really did the work to get the world to agree back in 2015, the Paris Agreement, that we must hold the rise in global temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And who is the driving force in AOSIS? CARICOM. CARICOM has largely been the driving force in AOSIS. And in fact, AOSIS is going to be meeting next year in Antigua and Barbuda. In fact, Antigua and Barbuda has been the recent chairperson of AOSIS and has done a lot of very good and positive work. So wherever you look, Tisha, wherever you look on this climate agenda, CARICOM is very deeply, very, very deeply involved. Another aspect of our Bridgetown Initiative that all CARICOM countries are pushing very hard is to convince all of the multilateral lending institutions that we have to get rid of this metric of trying to determine how if a country is deserving of grant financing and concessional financing based solely on GDP per capita. And we are saying GDP per capita does an injustice, because many of our CARICOM countries, they say, well, we are middle-income countries, we have high GDP per capita. But we are hit by a hurricane and all of that is wiped out in 24 hours. So we are saying, no, it cannot be GDP per capita. It must be our vulnerability to things like hurricanes. And therefore, yes, even though we are middle-income countries, we should be getting grant financing and concessional financing because of our vulnerability. So these are all aspects of the Bridgetown Initiative that all CARICOM countries are on board with and are trying to push very hard.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ambassador. Always enlightening to have you with us on Morning Barbados.
Thank you, Tisha. My pleasure as you.
Morning, morning, morning. Good morning.